Adam Conover is the creator and star of Adam Ruins Everything on True TV, which aired its third season in 2019, but feels kind of especially relevant now since a lot of the topics that the show has covered over the years have been affected by the current global health crisis. So first off, do you feel like having worked on this show for a few years now has kind of built up your understanding and your ability to kind of consume the information that's coming at us sort of fast and furious these days?
Yeah, I mean, our show has an incredibly intense research process, and so I'm very used to sucking up vast quantities of information quickly and converting them into a form that's easily digestible for me, so I can bring it to folks through comedy. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's a little easier for me to keep up than it would have been a few years ago. We also have done a lot of topics that are relevant to the COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, in I want to say 2018, we did an episode about how the CDC's budget has been cut recently and about how that has made us less prepared for the pandemic we all know is coming. And people are now keep tweeting this segment at me saying like, oh, you guys predicted the pandemic. And like, it wasn't us. We repeated other people, the researchers who were making that point. But yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of issues that really seem to have some special relevance now, for sure.
Last year, one of the first episodes you had when you came back with that latest batch of 8 episodes was Adam Ruins America, which just the title feels prophetic now. You covered, of course, America is a very big topic. You covered poverty, the Constitution, and Reconstruction. How did you and your writers kind of decide on taking that big topic and focusing in on those key issues?
Right. So our show is about dispelling common misconceptions, right? Myths that we all believe that aren't true. And we felt we wanted to do an episode on America's biggest myths, right? The biggest myths we have about what this country is. And we had done some other segments like that on the show prior. But this is a place where we could really concentrate on them and focus on them. So yeah, we talked about the myth of the American dream, the idea that anyone can make it here, that this is an incredibly socially mobile country, when in fact we rank very low on measures of economic mobility. And that's because of the massive wealth inequality in America. And it's because of specific policies that were put in place that make it more difficult for people to be upwardly mobile in society. So that idea of a meritocracy is truly a myth. Yeah, we talked about the idea that the Constitution is the myth that the Constitution is a holy document that must never be altered or changed in any way. That's a very fallacious way to look at the Constitution. It's ahistorical. It leads you to bad legal outcomes. We talked about, the myth of Reconstruction is one of the biggest ones. We have this story that we tell ourselves that the Civil War, that looms as large as the Revolutionary War in the American imagination, that this was, America's good war to stop slavery, and that even though, hey, we had to kill a lot of fellow Americans to do it, and it was very disruptive and very tragic, that, hey, we righted that wrong and we moved on. But the reality is that right after the Civil War, we went through a very brief Reconstruction period where the North had an occupying force in the South and forced the still, extremely racist leaders of the South to have a truly integrated society that allowed Black Americans to vote and to have educations and to participate in business. And that went on for close to a decade. And then the North got tired of exerting so much national power that way. It was a little bit contentious. There were, it required some backbone to do it. And our leaders decided they didn't have that backbone. They withdrew those forces. And almost immediately, leaders in the South set up an apartheid state in which, Black Americans lost the ability to vote. We actually had Black members of Congress in the years right after the Civil War. But then after that apartheid system went back in, we didn't have any for another 100 years, right? So that was like, if you look at what that period is, it's an extension of the slavery period that took an extra century to be put into place. And the shocking thing is we even had some of our, our civil rights amendments to the Constitution that, guaranteed that Black Americans had civil rights under the laws. Those were put in place right after the Civil War, but they actually were never enforced or implemented until nearly a century later. So the truth about the Civil War is that, that we had the war. We did end slavery, but then we didn't have the nerve to finish the job. And the result was an additional century of near slavery conditions for all the folks who we were trying to free. And that's a story that's almost never told because it cuts against the founding myth, one of the founding myths of America, one of the myths that we grow up with as kids.
And one great thing about that America episode is you've had Amos Vernon play Uncle Sam on the show for a while, and he creates this great personification of sometimes the more sinister elements of the United States kind of the American personality, the American ethic. What's it like getting to work more with him in that episode and really create that Uncle Sam personification?
Oh, that was wonderful. I mean, so our show in many ways is a living political cartoon where we have characters step in to be the embodiment of a certain idea. And so we had Amos, who's an incredibly funny comic actor, play Uncle Sam in many episodes before, whenever we want to represent, America did this, America did that, America, here's our relationship with Panama for the Panama Canal. Let's have Uncle Sam step in and act out a little scene to illustrate that. And so for that episode, we thought, man, wouldn't it be funny if the character who I'm talking to, every episode I'm talking to, who we call a mark, someone who I'm, dispelling their common misconceptions, and they're talking back to me and making jokes. We said that should be Uncle Sam. It should be an entire episode where I am dispelling the myths for Uncle Sam. And so we placed him in this really fun location we called America Town, which is sort of like The Nightmare Before Christmas, except America themed. It's like a town where Paul Bunyan lives there, and Lady Liberty, and et cetera. And it's 4th of July every day. And so that's where he lives in his home. And I pop in and start ruining America for him. It was great fun.
That episode and many others really balance kind of tones of the humor, but also some of the darker, more serious elements of a lot of these topics that you cover. And another episode where you did that was Ruining Murder, which kind of explores these topics within the framework of this very funny but very kind of darkly comic murder scheme that's happening ongoing. What was it like putting that one together?
Oh, I mean, that was one where we really decided we wanted to do a format parody of like Pretty Little Liars type show, a teen murder drama, and that we would be following these teenagers who accidentally kill someone with their car. And try to cover it up, and I pop up and tell them, actually in America it's almost perfectly legal to kill someone with your car. You'll almost never be prosecuted because our laws favor drivers so much more than pedestrians. And after that they decide to hide the body and things. I don't want to spoil anything, but things start to get more and more sinister as there are some shocking revelations. And that's a case where a lot of times in the show I'm popping in and ruining something for an average person who has average beliefs, but sometimes we like to do something where I'm talking to a very heightened character in a sort of fictional environment so that we can do a really, really fun format parody. And that's what that episode ended up being. I'm really, really proud of it.
And the show, tends to avoid kind of, overt, politicization or at least partisan kind of a slant or an approach. But it seems to be the reality that we're in, that stuff that's even apolitical becomes political very quickly.
Sure.
So when you're approaching something like the Adam Ruins Cops episode, is that what was the fine line to draw there in terms of approaching those topics, from swatting to mass incarceration?
Well, here's how I think about it. We're an intensely ambitious show. We always want to top ourselves in every way. One of those ways is by doing the format parodies in every single episode that I told you about. And so for that episode, we're doing a parody of, a cop style show. But we also want to push ourselves in terms of subject matter and do subject matter that many other shows would find too difficult to do or too hot button, or might do in the wrong way, right? And not tackle appropriately. And we really pride ourselves on our ability to spend a lot of time with the topic and figure out how to do it in a way that almost everybody in the country can appreciate. So what I really do as a creator is I try to think about the person watching the show on their couch, right? I try to imagine people of all different backgrounds on their couch watching the show. How does the show strike them? So we thought about, not just a kid in the city, but like, what about a kid, somewhere off in the country, their dad's a police officer. They're watching it with their dad. How do they feel about this episode? How do we make an episode that speaks to their concerns, right? As well as the concerns of folks who have suffered police brutality or from over-policing, right? This is a really, really difficult topic. And the way we approach it is by saying, okay, what do all those types of people misunderstand about policing in America? What are the really buried truths that we can surprise everybody with? And then we try to cover that in a really even-handed way. We've got another character there who's voicing the concerns of the audience, saying, wait, what about this? Have you considered that? And then I can speak to that, right? And I can moderate my position or modulate it a little bit, modulate my tone. We look at it from all sides, and comedy helps to go down easier as well, that we're able to make jokes through it. But we also make sure that we're not pulling our punches at all, that we still have a strong, punchy ending with a strong point of view. And I think the audience respects that. I really think they do. I mean, what we talk about on that episode, it's not partisan issues. It's not political in any way like that. It's just a difficult topic, but it's a topic that we really do need to talk about and be willing to have the difficult conversation about. But if you steer into that and you do it with eyes wide open, you treat your audience incredibly respectfully, as people who are intelligent, who can handle these issues and who are interested and empathetic and curious, and you treat the topic that same way yourself, you're going to end up with a piece that you're proud of. And that's one of the episodes that I'm absolutely proudest of that we've ever done.
One of the other really great things about the show is that it's always open to kind of evaluating itself and correcting itself where need be. And you had another one of those episodes that Adam ruins himself, where you had a previous one that was Emily ruins Adam. What were your thoughts about going into this version and sort of taking a different approach to like a similar kind of corrections episode?
Right. So one of the things that I am proudest of that we do on the show is that we do these self-reflective episodes where we turn our method onto ourselves and we say, are we really holding ourselves to our own standards? The previous version we did 2 years ago was Emily ruins Adam ruins everything, where she brought up some corrections. We wrote her doing this, but my frequent co-star Emily shows up and tells me about all the things we've gotten wrong on the show. And we talk about how, our method allows for that you shouldn't trust someone because they're right all the time. You should trust someone because they're transparent and honest when they get things wrong and that they correct themselves. And that's what we try to do. That's part of our method. On that show, on Adam Ruins Himself, first of all, I want to make it more clear that I'm the one doing this investigation, right? So I play myself twice. I'm playing two sides of both scenes. I'm playing two sides of every scene, popping up and really poking at myself and asking myself, are you being held to your own standards? And what I wanted to do was pull apart some of the inherent conflicts in the show. Not just, here's a thing we got wrong here or there, but like, where is the structure of the show at odds with our mission? And the really big one that we hit that I'm incredibly proud of, this is our season finale, and I think it's the best episode we've ever done. We talk about the influence of advertising on the show because we're a show that criticizes advertising, right? We critique it. We point out false advertising. We are skeptics about capitalism and about consumerism, right? Yet, we air on advertising-supported television on True TV, right? There's ads in between all of the segments. In fact, the only reason the show is on the air at all is to sell ads, right? If there were no ads, we wouldn't be on the air. We're just a vehicle for the commercials in between. So how does that affect the show, right? And we talk about, well, from a psychological perspective, are the ads more powerful than the show itself? If you look at it some ways, that they are, because ads are so repetitive and so colorful. They worm their way into your brain. And we also confronted the idea of, does advertising affect the content of the show? And I'm really proud of this, and I really have to give credit to True TV for being cool with us and supportive of us doing this segment. because what we did was we talked about the very few times, the 5 or so times throughout our history, that the network advertising concern and ad sales concern meant that we had to change content on the show. And so, for instance, we did a segment about Gatorade. We got a lot of notes on that segment, and I'm still proud of the segment that we did. We did an honest segment, but in Adam Ruins himself, we unpacked how that process went for the audience so they can sort of see. We dramatized a network notes process so they can see what network notes are, and they can see how much I push back and where I'm not able to push back anymore. And then the really cool thing was, the biggest topic I've always wanted to do is the NCAA, and talk about how unethical it is that the NCAA doesn't pay athletes. There's no excuse for it. There's no principle behind it. They just do it to cut costs, and it's unconscionable. You know, these young athletes are risking their lives, in the case of football, in order to make other people hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, right? I think that is not okay. I want to do a segment about it. Guess what's aired on True TV every March? March Madness, right? You got it. And so they said, hey, Adam, sorry, this is the only time they ever did this. Adam, we're not going to do this segment. The president of the network told me that himself. And I said, okay, that's fine. I pushed as hard as I could. I can sleep easy tonight because I know I at least fought for it. But then the next year I said, okay, guys, now I want to do a segment about how you stopped me from doing that segment. I want to talk about that on the air. And they said, you know what, Adam, that's okay. And so I have to give it up to Chris Lynn and Marissa Ronca and Angel Anisek and everybody else at True TV for being so supportive of us doing that. Because, you know, I really wrestled with that at the time, and I put myself wrestling with it on camera on the show as well, because that was a process I wanted to work through with the audience and show to them. So that self-reflection is something that's really core to our show, something that no other show does, and something that I'm really intensely proud of.
Now, you know, television productions, of course, right now are kind of just not happening because of the pandemic. But do you know what the status of season 4 is? Will there be a season 4, or is it completely in limbo? Or
it's one of those things where I know, and I am under a non-disclosure agreement. So. What I've been telling people is look, I'm not out of work right now. I got some stuff we got some irons in the fire, but no news that I can legally share. Yeah, I will say, just as long as we're talking about it, that with productions being shut down, I have real concerns about production starting up too early, or I look at a lot of the production guidelines I see, and they look like a fig leaf to me. That will cover their legal asses while still causing people to get infected on sets. And I think that's something that we all really need to look at incredibly carefully in the industry. And I'm really glad the unions are doing their due diligence on it.
Well, I look forward to then in 2 seasons' time seeing Adam Ruins non-disclosure agreements.
It's not a bad pitch, actually. In addition to the show, last year, you also started your Factually podcast, where you do more extensive interviews with a lot of the experts that you have on the show, in addition to other people. Has that really helped scratch the itch of a lot, topics that you go into for a half-hour show, and then you can actually talk to someone at length for an hour or so? Oh, yeah. I mean, Adam Ruins Everything. The reason we started doing the podcast was because on set, we'd have these experts in. We fly them in. We have some of the most incredible experts from around the country. We had this guy, Chris Fabricant, on in our first season. He's the head lawyer for the Innocence Project. He flies around the country, getting falsely accused people off of death row. Incredible person, incredible lawyer, great activist, just one of the most fascinating people you'll ever meet. We had him on the show. He's on the show for 2 minutes. And I'm talking to him in between takes, talking about what he does for a living. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the most interesting person I've ever met. I have to talk to you more. And so that was the reason we started the podcast, was so I could bring those people into that longer conversation. And it's really wonderful. I try to really make it feel like the best bar conversation you've ever been a part of, right? It's like you sitting on a stool next to philosophers, economists, historians, activists, journalists, people who've had incredible lives and incredible fountains of expertise about fascinating topics, and you just get to, chill out and listen to them, and I ask the questions that you'd want to ask, and it's a blast to do the show. I love it so much.
Well, congratulations on Adam Ruins Everything, the previous season, and hopefully the next season coming up, which you told me nothing about, legally.
I neither confirm nor deny.
With everything happening now, I mean, there's fodder for 10 more seasons at least. Unfortunately and fortunately, because there's so much to discuss. And congrats, I'm an active listener to the podcast, so thank you for that as well.
That's so kind of you. Thanks so much for listening, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks. Have a great one.
All right, you too.